Year 12 macro, I would say that there's three sections to it. Number one is understanding the difference between micro and macro and understanding what we call macroeconomic objectives. Number two is making sure we fully understand what AD, SRAS, and LRAS are. And number three is the macroeconomic policies. So I think Niraj and Asan, you were saying that you're on the policies, so fiscal policy and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And Kristen, you were saying you're doing economic growth, which is one of these objectives. So sometimes teachers go through this first, sometimes teachers go through this first. So I'm going to go through very briefly what all three of these things are, just so you have an overview of the entire year 12 macro, and then we'll go in order from this one first. So the first thing is anyone able to explain the difference between micro and macro? Just very briefly.
Is micro to do with like specific industries, and then macro is to do with like entire economies.
Yeah. So the macro, your description was perfect. Macro is about the entire economy. So most of the time we'll just be talking about the UK economy, but it could be about any particular economy. And in year 13 macro and some of year 12, we talk about the world economy as well, like how we interact with other economies, with trade. And micro is about individual markets or firms. But most of the time it's about individual markets. So for example, when we talk about price, in micro, we're talking about the price of chocolate, the demand for chocolate, the supply of chocolate, one particular market at a time. So just the market for chocolate, for example. Whereas macro, if we ever talk about prices, what we're referring to is the average price level of all the goods and services around the UK. Doesn't matter if one thing goes up, another thing goes down. We're just talking about on average. Um, and then in macro, we're going to use these diagrams to help illustrate all of our points. So just like in micro and in economics in general, the diagrams are really easy once you get the hang of it for the first time, and they're really powerful. So we just use them to illustrate our point. But the main thing is these understanding what is it that we care about in the UK economy. And then these are what we're going to learn that can help us to achieve these objectives if something goes wrong. Okay. So what are the four main macroeconomic objectives?
But is it not five?
Okay, I'm gonna come to that. There might be five, there might be six or seven, but I would say there's four main ones. So let's hear your five, and then I'll tell you which ones are the main ones.
There's inflation,
Yep,
Growth.
good.
Uh,
trade,
there's redistribution of
redistribution.
income,
Yeah.
Uh,
and then
and then one more.
employment.
Yep,
Employment.
cool. So the first one is low and stable rate of inflation. And that can also be called 2% inflation target. That's the
Yeah.
first thing. Very
Hmm.
important. The second one is in the word economics. So if you ever forget this one, it's obvious, but it's also so easy to forget. Just think of the word economics. You're studying economics. So one of the objectives is economic growth. We're going to look at that in detail as well. The next one is low unemployment. So in right now in the UK, unemployment is extremely high.
Yeah.
It's about 5%. Um, I don't know what this is saying, but yeah, it's about 5%. Yeah, here you go, 5%. And then this is talking about youth unemployment, maybe because I searched that a while back, but I don't know why it's coming up first. But youth unemployment, so graduate unemployment is super high as well. Um, and then this one, balance of trade, balance of payments from the current account is the fourth one, but we're not going to really study this much at all this year. It's going to be more in year 13 macro. We just touch on it in year 12, but I would recommend just focusing on it in year 13. But these are the four. And then I would say you've got side objectives. So one of them was what you guys said, which is not a main one, but it's reducing inequality or redistributing income and wealth. You've got minimizing environmental damage, but again, not a main one. And probably the most important that's not a main one is balancing the budget or reducing national debt. And when you guys do fiscal policy, you'll notice that it's all about government spending and tax revenue. And
Yeah.
that spending causes us to have national debt, which we have to pay back in the future. So that's one of the other things which you might care about. But for now, I would make sure that you know these as your four main macro objectives, or like the four main measures of macroeconomic performance. So what we're going to do for the first part, you know how I said there's three different sections. In this section, we're just going to look at these four objectives. And for each of these objectives, we need to make sure we know the basic definitions. We need to know how these things are measured. And we need to know why the target is 2% and why the target is economic growth and what the different types of these things are. Cool. So let me see if I can actually make a table for this. So let's start with inflation as one of the main objectives, and that is a 2% target. What are the key definitions we need to know? What are the types or causes of inflation? And what is the importance of the effects of having inflation either at target or not at target? Okay, cool. So the definitions we need to know are the definition of inflation, the definition of deflation, and the definition of disinflation. So what is inflation?
The increase
Rise in
in
general price level.
price level. Yeah.
Yep, rise in average price level, rise in general price level, any of those. And again, just to recap, in micro, we look at stuff like the price of chocolate or the price of a chair. In macro, it's just average prices around the entire economy.
Yeah.
And then what is deflation?
The opposite.
Decrease.
Yeah, perfect. And then disinflation is whenever inflation is continuing to happen, but at a slower rate. So when the rate of inflation slows down. For example, from 4% to 2%. But also remains above zero. If it was to go negative, then that would be deflation. So whenever it slows down, that's disinflation. So what that means is inflation was going up at 4% a year. Prices were going up at 4% a year, and now they're going up at only 2% a year. So it's slowed down. And that's probably a good thing because the target is usually around the 2% mark. There are, so I also wanted to put measures here. So the first thing is, how do we measure inflation? Does anyone know?
Uh,
It's those forums, right?
Say that again.
Wait, never mind, never mind.
Oh, I think were you talking about the survey thing?
Yeah, that was a different
We're going to use that for unemployment in a minute. Does anyone know what the index is called for inflation?
Not inflation rate.
CPI.
No.
Nah.
So the CPI is the Consumer Price Index. An index is just a number. So an index is going to be a number nearby to 100. So if the original number was 100 and next year the number says 104, that means there's been a 4% increase in prices over that year. If it went to 96, then there'll be a 4% fall in prices in that year. So index numbers compare a measure from the base year. The Consumer Price Index measures or tracks the prices of a weighted basket of goods and services that are that across the UK. Yeah. So the basket is determined by consumer survey. Basically, what we do, right, is we do some quick surveys to check what people are buying and spending their money on. And on average, most people are going to buy a carton of milk a week, a loaf of bread a week, eggs, like pay their rent or like pay for fuel or pay for travel and all this kind of stuff. Maybe like one holiday a year, whatever that is. And then there'll be this basket of goods and services. This basket of goods and services is meant to represent the average consumer in the country. And then we just track the prices of that thing. And each of the items is weighted. I'm just going to change the wording slightly. So the prices of an average basket of goods and services. And the items are weighted depending on how popular they are. Okay, so the main thing you need to know is that the measure is called the CPI. The old measure was called the RPI. The CPI just tracks the prices of an average basket of goods and services like every month. And then if we compare, say, October 2025 to October 2024, then we know how much inflation was in the last 12 months. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. There are two types of inflation. One is demand pull inflation.
Cost push.
Yeah, and the other is cost push inflation. So demand pull inflation is caused whenever AD shifts to the right. And cost push inflation is whenever SRAS shifts to the left. Or technically just aggregate supply in general, but especially SRAS. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about those two, because when we do AD and AS, we're going to understand that fully anyway. But what I do want to move on to is the importance of measuring inflation and why it's really bad if inflation gets too high and why it's really bad if there's deflation. Because these things sound obvious that, yeah, it will be bad if prices are going up too much. And yeah, wait, we don't even know why it will be bad. If we don't study economics properly, no one would really know why it's bad if prices go down. So I want to see what you guys think. So does anyone know why high inflation is bad?
Cost of living gets too high and people will suffer.
You're right. Cost of living would get higher and higher and higher. How can we develop that into a nice chain of reasoning? Because as you know, you've got
Yeah.
15 markers and 25 markers where you really want to show off your understanding. So
Mm.
because it's such an obvious thing, it's hard to actually form that, but do you have any ideas?
Um, and I think
Okay, so I'm going to help you out a bit. We're going to start off with assumption because economics is always built from some sensible assumptions. So, assuming that wages do not rise in line with prices, that's the first assumption. So, if prices are going up at 4% a year, on average, some people might get a 4% pay rise. Most people might get a 1% pay rise or a 0% pay rise. That's what ends up happening. So that's the key thing because if prices go up by 10% and wages go up by 10%, there's no issue. But it's the fact that wages are not going up. So we need to like emphasize that to help us explain why high inflation is bad. And then carry on because you're onto something.
um
So what was your
Would
point?
it discourage people to like borrow and lend or no?
Um, mm, Not really, maybe, but let's not overcomplicate it yet because we're going to come back to that stuff when we do interest rates.
Mhm.
Let's go back to your original point about cost of living. So that was fine. So assuming that wages do not rise in line with prices, people are going to spend more of their money on their basic needs and their bills as cost of
then
living has increased. Say that again.
could you say then there's less disposable income as well
Yes,
because of
spot on.
that?
Exactly. So people are going to be left over with less disposable income.
Yeah.
So therefore, and a word that I want you to remember for all of macroeconomics, all the time, think about if you can end your chain of reasoning on living standards. So therefore, living standards will get worse.
Okay.
And living standards is so important because the whole point of studying economics, especially macroeconomics, is to find a way for everybody to have amazing standard of living or improved standard of living. That's the whole point of studying macroeconomics, which is what makes it so interesting. And all these four objectives, they're not just there to have a target number. Okay, wait. Okay, great, we can have 2% inflation. Okay, great, we can have economic growth. The whole point of having these targets is so that everyone can have a good standard of living. There is more we can add to that, but for now, this is a nice detailed but also simple description of why high inflation is bad. And then the more knowledge you have, you can stack it on top. Does anyone know why deflation is bad? So a reminder, deflation is when there's a fall in average price level. This is a weird one. I don't know if anyone will know why that's bad.
Because people aren't going to spend, they're just going to wait for prices to keep going down.
Yeah, good. So Neeraj, Hassan, did you know that already?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah.
So Neeraj gone.
People are less likely to spend because they're waiting for prices to go down.
Okay, cool. So Hassan, if you've never heard this before, this is like something that's like you don't think of it until you hear it for the first time. But in economics, again, it's a little bit of an assumption, but we assume that people form expectations based on recent news.
Yeah.
So if price level has fallen, there is an expectation that prices will continue to fall.
Wait, is it called a deflationary spiral?
Yeah. And that's what happens when this keeps on going more and more and more.
Okay.
Mhm. So basically, Hassan, imagine if prices went down in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
We're going to assume, well, most people are going to assume, it's pretty sensible, but they're going to assume that prices are going to keep falling for the next couple of months as well.
So they'll wait further and then
Exactly.
they'll
And
buy it
then
when it's moved up.
exactly. And obviously you're still going to buy your bread, your milk, you're going to go out for
Yeah.
a restaurant or something, but we're talking TVs, washing machines, cars,
Yeah.
houses. All these guys who are thinking of buying a house or buying a
Uh-huh.
car or something big, they're gonna wait. Okay.
Yeah.
So people delay their spending. And if you forget, the word delay starts with DE and the word deflation starts with DE as well, so that can help you remember. Um, People delay their spending. And why is this bad if people delay their spending? Wait, like, because in real life, we're taught like, okay, saving money is good, and we're taught there's nothing wrong with waiting to buy something. So why is it bad in economics?
People don't spend, and well, businesses won't profit, and then government get less tax.
What's the last thing you said?
The government will get less tax.
Okay. So I want you to your that was very good, but we're not finished. So why would we care? Because remember, just think from a selfish perspective. So we're like just people, we're like consumers mostly. We're consumers and
Hmm.
then we're future, your students, you're going to be workers or business owners in the future. So if people don't spend the money, how does that impact us? Cool, the government don't get tax revenue, but why does that impact us?
Well, that's healthcare and education,
Exactly.
less
So if
living
that's one
standards.
thing. That's one thing. Less tax revenue means the government are going to spend less money on public services, for example, the NHS, for example, police, street cleaning, firemen, all that stuff, and then that can affect our standard of living. Anything else? Can we jump back one step? Because what
Do we get
about
taxed
that point
more?
about how firms don't make enough money because people aren't spending? How would that impact us in another way?
Do we not get like high taxes?
Yeah, so you're right as well. Because of the fact that government might make less tax revenue, those who are being taxed might be taxed by more. But can we just jump back to the step where if people delay their spending, firms make less profits,
So
or
they
have,
can't keep producing stuff
and then
for
what
us.
would happen if they can't keep producing stuff for us?
There'll be a shortage of supplies or products.
No, keep thinking.
Um,
If firms have nothing to make, then what are they going to do? Who do they
They're going
not
to close
do?
down.
And if they close down, then what happens?
Uh,
and there's nothing for the people to buy.
What about workers?
Ah, they lose their jobs. And
Exactly.
then
And then we don't have our jobs. We get made redundant. We don't have our income, and then our living standard falls. And then
eh,
on top of that, to make the point into an even better point, we can talk about the whole government tax revenue thing. Okay, cool. Businesses aren't making money, workers aren't working, so the government aren't collecting income tax, the government aren't collecting corporation tax, and then all the stuff we talked about. So you guys said a really good point collectively. You just missed out that one basic point about firms not making money means workers lose their jobs. And that's a massive thing. That's what's happening right now as well. Not the deflation, the unemployment thing. Um, so less demand for goods and services that firms are producing means firms will lay off workers because workers are an example of derived demand. So firms will never have workers for decoration. They'll only have workers because there's demand for goods and services. So no demand for goods and services means no demand for workers or no need for workers. As a result, less disposable incomes, worse living standards, and also less tax revenue for the government in many forms. So less corporation tax, less income tax. And if there's all this stuff happening, AD, which we're going to learn about later, would fall more. A negative multiplier, again, we're going to learn about that. And then that's only going to cause more deflation, more uncertainty, more deflation. Or that's what Niraj said, deflation. What do you say, spiral?
Deflationary spiral.
That's it. That's the worst case scenario. This is what's been happening in Japan for years. So if you want to learn about real life examples, so every now and then, so with the whole application thing, I wouldn't force myself to learn random examples, but whenever you find something interesting and you know about something, read it because then you can use it in your exam.
Wait, what's the definition of the multiplier effect? I keep getting confused.
I'm going to come to that. When we do AD and SRAS, I'm going to do the multiplier effect and we'll do it properly. Cool. So Japan. Japan's 3 lost decades. The Japanese economy has picked up at times over the 30 years, but they've been on and off having 30 years of like a deflationary trap. Start of deflation in 1998, and what are these numbers showing? Just really slow economic growth. And they couldn't really do anything to get out of it because confidence was always so low, and there was always an expectation that things would remain cheap or things would get cheaper. Okay, cool. Just to summarize really quickly, high inflation is bad because if we assume that wages are staying the same, then higher prices would lead to higher cost of living, lower disposable incomes, and worse living standards. Deflation is bad and probably much worse because there's an expectation that people will delay their spending as they anticipate prices to fall further in the future, so they wouldn't buy something now that's going to lose value. That leads to businesses not having demand for their goods and services, which means businesses are going to lay off workers. And that leads to even more problems like less disposable incomes, worse living standards for people, and also less tax revenue for the government, so less money being there to be used in public services like schools and hospitals and stuff. Moving on, let's do unemployment because it's a quick one. Unemployment is just the okay, cool. What's unemployment? It's not one you really have to know that you're going to use much, but it's never harmful to know the word for word definition. It's just the people who are unable to find a job, but they are willing and able to work. Basically, we're not counting. The main thing I'm trying to say here is that we're not counting those who are either students or those who are retired because they're not willing and able to work. They don't need a job or want a job. But everyone else who's looking for a job but can't find one, they count as unemployed. How do we measure it? So Tristan, you were going to talk about that before.
There's like surveys that are sent to 40,000 people or households.
Good. And what's the other way of measuring unemployment?
Is it job seeker allowance?
Yeah. So the names for both of the things you said are one, the labor force survey. What was it you said about that again?
It's sent to 40,000 people, households, I mean.
Yep. And what does it kind of do?
It just checks for unemployment. I'm not really sure, but I just know it's a survey.
Yeah, no, that's literally it. So there's a questionnaire or an interview, and it says on Google it's sent to 25,000 households, but whatever the number is, you don't need to know exactly anyway, that's fine. And they collect information of your household and who's working, who's not working, and that kind of thing. And the and that's a bit more formal and a bit of a longer process, but it's quite useful to know for the government. And the other way is the claimant count. That one's much easier. All they're doing is who's out there applying for unemployment benefits, like the job seekers allowance. They'll just count those people as unemployed. Whoever gets approved, they'll count those people as unemployed. It's nice and simple. The only downsides about the claimant count is that one, there's going to be some people who are unemployed but still not claiming the benefits. And sometimes there's also going to be people, actually, it's going to be quite common. There's going to be people who are working part-time or have accepted a really like dead job, like temporary job that they don't want. So they would personally classify themselves as unemployed, but they're just doing something to tick over while they're desperately applying for other jobs. So they won't be able to claim benefits as well or apply for them. Anyway, the most important thing, these are just like little bits and bobs, but the most important thing is just the the 4 or 5 types of unemployment. So we've got, let's get the easier ones out of the way. So seasonal unemployment.
The cyclical.
Yep,
I think it's frictional
yep,
and structural.
yep, perfect. You might also see others like voluntary, involuntary, all that stuff. But for now, let's just do these. The first two are not important whatsoever. They're more likely to be testing a very short question or multiple choice. The bottom two are extremely, extremely important because they're going to be there in the big essays. They're going to be massive themes that you'd want to, like, when you're doing policies, you want to know how to fix them as well. So seasonal unemployment is literally just caused by a lack of demand for some certain business services and therefore certain workers during specific seasons, e.g., like the tourism industry, people who work in like, I don't know, like Christmas trees or Christmas cards and that kind of thing, ice cream vans. Frictional unemployment is caused when workers are moving between jobs. And again, it's nothing to be concerned about. So someone might quit their job and they're looking for a job. 2 months later, they get a job, but for 2 months they were unemployed. That's fine. That's not a big thing to worry about. But cyclical unemployment and structural unemployment are massive issues if they happen. So what's the difference between the two of them?
It's structural to do with the skills of the workers.
Yep. Can you explain a bit more? But you're right.
Is it like is it like a mismatch of skill that different workers have different skills? So
Perfect. But
yeah.
I got a question then. Why does that end up happening? Why does there end up being a mismatch of skills? Why does someone have skills but they're not useful?
Is it because the job doesn't demand it, like, or that place, there's no
I'll
need
just
for that job, like a farmer in a city?
I'll just add one more point. So the job doesn't demand it any. So Asan, you were spot on. I'm just gonna add one more word. You said the skills, and Neeraj, you said it as well, but the skill mismatch. Basically, we want to say that it doesn't just happen randomly. You can't, why would someone have a skill, but it's not needed? Why would they have got that skill in the first place? So it's really important to understand that it's something that changed that meant
Is it
that
like
their skills aren't needed anymore. So yeah, Tristan.
is it like a change in technology or something like with
Yeah.
machinery?
Yeah. So the thing is, there's not going to be one exact reason, but again, you're spot on. That's one example. So on a more generic level, I'm just going to say structural unemployment happens when a specific industry declines and and those workers will lose their job. When a specific industry declines and there's no more demand for the workers in that industry. That can happen for many reasons. And again, over time, read about and use your own examples because it makes things more interesting and more easy to remember. And then you can spit them out in exams and you get good application marks. And it means you won't forget what structural unemployment is as well. So one example I can think of is UK steel industry declined. So everyone in the steel industry no longer was needed. Why did the UK steel industry decline? Well, we import steel now because it's cheaper, so we just import it from China. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what's the main issue then to fix this fact that the guys in the steel industry, they had really useful skills, but now it's not useful anymore because it's cheaper to import steel. What is it that we would do to help cut down the number of people who are structurally unemployed?
Uh,
So all these steel workers, what are we going to do to help them? We can't just force them to work in steel. There's no need, there's nothing to
well,
do. So what would you
create
do?
other jobs for them.
Like how? There are other jobs, but how would you help them get other jobs? You mentioned something about a skills mismatch before. So what would you do to help these guys who were
Or
still,
train them in a different
yeah,
like sector.
retrain the workers? So for example, retail workers, there's still retail workers, but there's not anywhere near as many retail workers because of self-checkout machines, and that's fine. And even like click and collect and online ordering. So there's not as much need for retail workers. So instead of um, us complaining that there's no jobs for them in retail, we could help them to retrain and they could get other jobs over time. It's a massive issue in the short term because they're not going to be able to retrain instantly, and we do need to the government will need to pay the unemployment benefits and they're going to suffer for a little while. But over time, if you retrain them, that's the best long-term solution to this issue. It's the same when AI gradually takes over for more and more jobs. So let's say one day, if I make it up, one of the big jobs that AI completely takes over is accountants. That's relatively realistic that in the next 10 or 20 years, you won't need to have an accountant because AI can do that kind of work. So what are we going to do? We're not just going to complain that AI is because AI can do it better or cheaper. So then you just have to help retrain the workers or encourage people to take up different skills so that there's no mismatch anymore. What's cyclical unemployment?
Isn't it
Uh,
just like a constant cycle where unemployment like increases and decreases?
Yeah, pretty much. And Neeraj, what you're going to say?
no, I was thinking the same thing. It's because business cycle.
Cool. So it's when aggregate demand decreases in the economy. So this affects all different types of workers. The best example in recent history was COVID. If in COVID it was the government asked everyone to isolate or stay at home, and we weren't allowed to go out to restaurants or to the gym or to the pub or to a dessert shop or anywhere, then people working in a restaurant or in a dessert shop or in a school or in a cafe or anywhere, they all lost their jobs. So it doesn't matter where you worked, you're going to be affected. So unlike structural, which is just affecting a small group of people or everyone in a specific industry, this is affecting anyone from different industries. And what would you do to fix that? Well, it all depends on the business cycle, which we're going to learn about very soon. But you want to wait for the economy to recover or help the economy to recover. So help the economy to recover. And just a reminder as well that demand for labor is an example of derived demand. So in these cases of cyclical unemployment, it's as simple as there's no demand for goods and services because people can't leave the house. So there's not going to be demand for labor. We don't need to worry about this. We need to worry about this, and then this will fix itself. Okay, so if there's no demand for ice cream, there's not going to be any demand for ice cream workers. It can happen in any kind of crash, so like the financial crisis or after Brexit or whenever confidence is going to be a bit lower, people are going to still lose their job. So right now could be an example of cyclical unemployment because of low confidence. The last one then, because we're not going to do balance of payments, we'll leave that for later. So we're going to do economic growth. There's lots of tiny little things that I want you to remember. So let's go through them. So first of all, what is economic growth? Does anyone know?
I know it, but I don't know how to like define it.
It's fine. It's an increase in real GDP.
Oh yeah.
And then the next definition is real GDP. Does anyone know what that is?
Uh,
Is it like the total, like the sum of the input and output of, I mean, in import and exports of like goods and services?
You were right when you said the total value, but it's not imports and exports. It's just the total value of goods and services produced in the UK economy. Okay, so all the stuff with value that got produced in the economy. So it could be a driving lesson that was a service that was provided in the UK. It could be a car. So that got produced in the UK. Anything that got produced in the UK, that will be all add up and give us our real GDP. We're going to do circular flow in a bit as well, but income equals output equals
expenditure.
expenditure. What this means is that we could measure the output, which is what I said. That's all the stuff that got produced in the UK. But on average, yes, sure, some people are going to save money and not spend all of it. Some people are going to borrow money and spend that. So overall, on average, however much output there is also going to be how much spending there is, and all that spending is going to be based on people's income. So whether you measure output or whether you measure income or whether you measure spending, they should basically be the same number every year with subtle differences. So economists can take their pick as to which one is the best. So you might also hear national income, and then in the spec it might say what are the downsides of using real GDP to measure living standards. So real GDP per capita is seen as the easiest way to measure living standards, but it doesn't factor in inequality and it doesn't factor in happiness. So you've got other stuff as well to assist that. You've got stuff like the happiness survey or the happiness index, or you've got inequality measures and that kind of stuff as well. But what does the word real mean in economics? And what does the word per capita mean in economics?
Doesn't it mean per person?
Per capita is per person, so just divide by the population and you'll get your per capita number. So if
Is
here's something billion, then you divide it by the population, you're going to get about £30,000, which is the real GDP per capita in the UK. And that's also the average income per person in the UK as well. And what does real mean?
does it mean like uh, relative to inflation?
Yep, adjusted for inflation. So that could mean minusing by inflation or dividing by inflation. It depends. You don't need to calculate it, but it depends. But the easiest example is if you bought a house for £50,000 in 1990, and since then there's been 100% inflation, Well, my house now is not worth £50,000. If you factor in inflation, that house is worth or was actually bought for the equivalent of £100,000. That's what real is. So we're just making sure we're adjusting our number for inflation as we go along. So if Ronaldo was the record signing for £80 million in 2010, then that money now would be way more because the record signings now are like 200 million. So you're just adjusting for how prices change over time because otherwise you're gonna give misleading data by saying that houses were so cheap or Ronaldo was so cheap. Also the per capita thing, that's more useful. So real is useful for comparing over time. Per capita is useful for comparing different countries. So for example, if you say the real GDP is a certain number here and the real GDP is a certain number in India or China, well, India and China have massive populations, so you'd expect that number to be higher. So it's better to compare per capita to have a rough idea of living standards. Okay. Types and causes and stuff of unemployment, of economic growth. We've got in Edexcel, you'll hear the word um, actual economic growth and potential economic growth. In HUA, you'll hear the word short run economic growth and long run economic growth. So just refer to the word that you want to use in your spec, but actual and potential makes way more sense anyway. But if you hear short run or long run in HUA, that's what it means. So does anyone know if economic growth in general is an increase in real GDP, what's the difference between the actual economic growth and the potential economic growth of a country?
Wait, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, what's the difference between so economic growth is an increase in real GDP.
Mm-hmm.
There's two types. You can either have short run economic growth or you can have long run economic growth.
Is
Mm-hmm.
long run the one that's is it like projected, like they expect that to happen over time, like they plan for it, and then the other one is like it's actual, so it's like what they've seen, like the progress they've made.
You're quite close. And Neeraj, were you going to add anything else?
Nah.
Okay. Um, Tristan, you're doing economic growth at the moment at school. Anything else to add?
Not really. Not that I know of.
Okay, cool. So actual economic growth is nothing different to what we've already said. It's just when real GDP increases. Potential or long run economic growth is, so Asan said something about you're projecting it in the future, or the exact way of describing it is when there is an increase in productive potential or productive capacity. And you would have seen this in two ways. If anyone's done LRAS at school, whenever LRAS increases, you've got long run or potential economic growth. But in micro, you've all seen it. The PPF curve is showing all the possible outputs. You can either be there or here or there in an economy. If that shifts out, that means there's potential economic growth or long run economic growth because there's now the maximum possible thing you can produce is now higher. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any questions? It's quite important. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Does that fully make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Couple more definitions. Okay. One, let's just get through the different stages of the economic cycle. So what are the different stages?
Could you say recession at the bottom?
Sorry, say that again.
Is recession or like a part of it?
Yep,
Like when it's
100%.
going down?
Yep, the worst part is the recession. What else?
Um,
What's the best part?
is it something? Yeah, boom, economic boom.
Yep, a boom. And what's the two in between? What happens
Um,
after a recession to get better?
um,
Re
recovery.
yeah, recovery. And then after a boom, it's a downturn. There's other words you can use it interchangeably. There's not like you have to memorize these exact four. That's just the ones I know. But yeah, you've got a recession, a recovery, a boom, and a downturn. And when you describe them, basically in macroeconomics, if you're not sure what to do and you want to describe something, think about the four objectives and living standards. So ignore living standards for now, but just the objectives, the three main objectives. So all of the main four apart from balance of payments. How are they going to be looking like in a recession? How is unemployment going to be looking like, high or low?
High,
Higher unemployment, good. Economic growth is going to be,
slow, all that.
yep.
Yeah.
And inflation, is it going to be high or is it going to be positive or negative? And like, what's it going to be like?
It'll be high inflation. Positive.
Mhm. It's going to be most likely to be deflation, but it can be inflation as well. It can be. It depends on if it's demand pull or cost push, what's causing the issues. But there can also be deflation in a typical recession. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the definition of a recession is when there is, does anyone know when there is
Um, deflation for 2 consecutive quarters.
negative economic growth for two consecutive quarters? Yeah. Not deflation, negative economic growth, otherwise. What's a quarter?
Not good.
What do you mean by a quarter? Okay, so a quarter is just a quarter of a year. So 3 months is a quarter. That's what if you ever hear the word quarter in economics, it means 3 months because it's a quarter of a year. So you know how
Mm-hmm.
you say Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 in corporate places or in the news, that just means
Yeah.
the second, third, fourth quarter of the year. So that in 3 months at a time.
Mm-hmm.
If on average over 3 months there was negative economic growth, and then in the next 3 months there was also negative economic growth, because that happened for two consecutive quarters, then that means there's a recession officially. Obviously, economic growth can be negative for 5 months, and that's bad as well. But it's the fact that it happens for two consecutive quarters. We officially call it a recession because that's just the name for it. In a boom, you're gonna have what's unemployment gonna be like?
Low.
Low.
Yeah, because there's lots of confidence, lots of spending, and therefore there's going to be lots of jobs available because people need to buy stuff. So firms need to make stuff. So firms are going to hire people. Economic growth is going to be high,
Yeah.
and inflation,
Inflation will be higher.
yeah, inflation is most likely to be on the higher side. Again, that the inflation bit depends. But when we do AD and AS and some of the other stuff, we'll understand that properly. But a typical boom, there's going to be like lots of jobs, nice growth, high incomes, but also a chance that prices are going to get higher and higher as the economy starts to overheat. Recovery and downturn are just somewhere in the middle. But the last keywords I want you guys to know are positive output gap and a negative output gap. Does anyone know what those are?
No.
Okay. So you know how I talked about actual growth and potential growth? Can someone just quickly remind me what the differences are between the actual growth and the potential growth?
Actual is just like just an increase in the real GDP.
Yep. And what about potential growth?
Potential is like uh
What is it that's gonna increase?
what I forgot.
Anyone else?
Was
What's
it
that
something to do
thing?
with efficiency of the
What's that thing
uh,
that shifts from micro in when there's potential growth?
LRAS?
Yeah, LRAS or the PPF. Good. So there's when there's an increase in LRAS or productive capacity. So whenever the economy is producing below, when actual growth is below potential growth, then there's a negative output gap. And whenever actual growth is more than potential growth, there's a positive output gap. Whenever actual growth is higher than potential growth, or whenever short run growth is higher than long run growth, that's a positive output gap, and a negative output gap is whenever actual growth is less than potential growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Nice. It was actually perfect timing. And we don't really need to do the importance bit because we covered it here. And it's kind of straightforward for that. But it was mostly for inflation that I really wanted to go through the importance of it. You know how I said there's kind of three sections? One is
Mm.
the
Mm.
understanding the objectives, then you've got these and these. So the thing is, this only takes like 10 minutes, so we'll do that next time. And then this is another fat one, so we'll do that over the whole session. But we've actually covered all of this. What I'd recommend then is in your individual specs, whether you do AQA or EdXL, go through the spec for the relevant sections or go through Uplearn for the relevant sections and make sure you've ticked off all the tiny bits because there's going to be tiny spec points that are pretty easy, but you just have to make sure you go through them once. But all the understanding you now have, and the hard one was economic growth. So make sure you are able next time to confidently tell me what a positive output gap is and what a negative output gap is. Last
Hmm.
thing I'll say is when there's a potential output gap, do we think what do we think of the objectives? Like, do we think there's going to be high inflation or low inflation?
Uh, so what do
Gonna
you
be
mean when it's
low.
a positive output gap?
It's gonna be like around 2%.
And Neeraj, what was your answer?
No, I wasn't. Wait, I didn't hear the question properly.
In a positive output gap, do we think there's going to be inflation is going to be bang on or too high or too low?
Would it be low?
No.
Oh,
So if the economy is growing higher than the trend, so Assange, remember how you said that the potential growth is like how we're preparing for the economy to grow bit by bit by bit?
Yeah,
Okay, so imagine if we're growing too fast right now. What's that going to do to the prices of goods and services?
gonna go really high.
Yeah. I want you to think of a positive output gap as the economy is overheating. The
Okay.
green line showing steady growth that we should be maintaining based on our supply side policies, which we're going to learn about afterwards. Um, but every time the red line goes above, that's the economy is overheating. We're doing too much. And whenever the red line goes below the green line, it means we're not doing enough. We're slacking off. Okay. And over time, it's going to average out, average out, average out. But these situations, we're overheating the economy. We're doing too much. These scenarios, we're not doing enough. So when there's a positive output gap, there's going to be high pressure on prices. Everyone's going to be working. because everyone's doing way too much. People are going to be working quite hard. That's fine. So low unemployment, and obviously there's high economic growth as well. So the only issue with a positive outlook is that there's high inflation. And then negative output gaps is going to be lower inflationary pressure. So depending on how big the output gap is. But there's also going to be high unemployment because everyone's not being used in the economy. So if there's 5% inflation, sorry, if there's 5% unemployment right now in the UK, doesn't that mean that the economy could be doing 5% better if they found a way to make use of those people who are not working, right?
Mhm.
And there's going to be slower economic growth in that time.
Hmm.
The last thing I would add is that in microeconomics, one subtopic does not really link to another subtopic, which is a good thing. In macroeconomics, there's going to be sections where you don't really get stuff. And then by the time you finish, it's all going to link together and you're going to understand everything in like overnight. Because all of these things in macro, both in year 12 and year 13, macro links really well to everything else. So there'll just be a night where you just get everything because that's how macro kind of works.